Hey, Sisterhood, it is Kristen here, and this is going to be a really special, kind of unique episode because, as you can see, one, I have a male on as a guest. Blake, welcome.
Hi, what's up, guys? It's super good to be
we,
here.
I'm so glad you're here. We normally don't have guys on the Girl Defined show, so, a little extra special there.
Yeah.
But what we're going to be talking about today is something that is a really it's a very common topic in our society, talking about drag queens, LGBTQ issues, the lifestyle. But today we have a unique opportunity to talk to a man, Blake, who was in that side of things, in that world as a drag queen, but God saved him and brought him out and opened his eyes to the beauty of the gospel, the transforming work of Christ in changing our desires, giving us new desires for him to worship him on the throne. And so Blake has a really powerful testimony, and I'm excited about digging in with you, Blake, just into some of the specific aspects of even the drag movement and how it's growing in popularity. And now I feel like I'm seeing it everywhere. But 5 years ago, it felt very much under the radar. So we're going to get into all of that, kind of the behind the scenes, and then really try to look at it through a gospel lens, a hope-filled, Christ-centered, loving gospel lens. Thank you so much for being here with us today to talk about
Yes.
this really important topic.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to share my story and kind of shed some light. Um, there's very few ministers that feel comfortable talking about this particular subject because they either don't connect to it or they get too nervous that they're going to say the wrong thing, or even there's some ministers out there that are just scared to talk about it because they don't want the hate that's going to come with it. So
Yeah.
I'm totally open to kind of just talk about it and really get truth out there.
Yes, and I love that. I so appreciate that. And you'll know, Blake, at Girl Define, we aren't afraid to talk about the hard stuff, the
Yeah.
controversial stuff. In fact, there are a lot of people who hate us and don't like what we do because of that.
Hmm.
But it's the truth that sets us free. And as believers who have the truth, who have God's word, who have his design, who have the understanding of the gospel and the transforming work of Christ, it's really unloving to stay silent, to not talk about the truth, right? And to not bring Christ into every aspect. There is no conversation, there is no sin, there is no struggle that is beyond the redeeming work and power of Christ. And so we go there here at Girl Defined. In fact, I know you wrote a book. We wrote a book too that was kind of like, ooh, like a little hot button book that, people love and people hate. And it's called Sex, Purity, and the Longings of a Girl's Heart.
Wow.
And it's taking a deep dive into God-defined sexuality, which is a very controversial topic,
Hmm.
but one that we've heard over the past few years has brought so much freedom to women who are wrestling with all sorts of different sexual struggles, just like I've had my struggles and you've had your struggles, but are finding freedom in the power of the gospel and the truth of God's word. And I know you wrote a book that recently came out
Hmm.
called From Mascara to Manhood. Is that right?
Yeah, so I was actually it took me about 2 years to write, and I wrote it about, I guess it was about 5-ish years ago. And then it took me a process to kind of figure out like the editing and all that kind of stuff. And then the Lord
Yeah.
kind of directed me to a publishing company, and they took care of everything for me. And then at the time, my wife and I were like freshly married, and so we were broke and we didn't have any money, And we were fresh out of college,
Yes.
we were fresh out of ministry school, so we were just kind of like we had server jobs, and we were just trying to like make ends meet, basically. And so, unfortunately, my book got pushed to the back burner, and while in the process of editing my book, my editor contacted me from the company and was like, "Hey, going through your book and editing it, like literally, it has like ministered to me. I love this book. I'm so excited
Oh,
about this book, and it needs to happen." Um,
that's awesome.
and so she literally actually reached out and was like, "How much do you lack?" And I was like, "Well, it's this amount." And
Mm,
so she contacted the guy who was doing everything for me with the book, and was like, "I'm going to pay off the balance," and literally
wow.
paid the balance of my book. And then it actually ended up coming out that very next year, just in time for Gay
Wow.
Pride in June. And so it literally
Mm,
released in June. It got hit on Amazon in June. And it was just like, it was just amazing because I was so frustrated in that time about the book and like how I wanted it out, but we just couldn't get it there at the time. And then
yeah.
literally how the Lord orchestrated every piece of the puzzle specifically to release it. in that time. It was just incredible to watch.
Wow. Wow, that is such a God story. I love when you get to see him work so clearly. Okay, so you have a book called From Mascara to Manhood. You're obviously married now to a woman,
Hmm.
a believer, but at some point in your past, you were a drag
Hmm.
queen. And, obviously, two very different lifestyles, what's happening today and what was happening then. So take us back in time, way back in time, to your childhood, your growing up life. You don't have to get super detailed, but just give all of us an overview of what your childhood looked like. Were you religious? Were you not? What was your
Yeah,
family
yeah.
dynamics? And then we'll kind of get into your story a little bit more into your teen years after that.
Yeah, so I grew up in a pretty conservative household. I grew up in the Bible Belt in Georgia. Um, I actually just left my family from a vacation, so I feel like I have more of a Georgia accent than I normally do. But um, I grew up in Georgia. We did attend church. We attended a mega church, and it's an amazing church, and I love the pastor. But I always just kind of felt lost. Um, and from an early age, I kind of really didn't know why I felt the way I felt, but I realized ultimately I was attracted to guys, and I was more like I felt more connected to with all the female roles and those kind of things in cartoons and stuff that I would watch. And then about
How old were you at this point, would you say?
I would say about 6 or 7 when I really kind of decided that I liked guys or I liked boys.
Okay.
Um, and then at the same time, at the age of 7, I actually had my first sexual encounter and I was molested. And it was presented to
Mm.
me as a game, and it was kind of just like written off as it's not really a big deal. And I remember like feeling terrible about it and then going to church and like constantly asking the Lord to forgive me, but I felt like it was something that He was never going to
Mm.
forgive me of as a child. But then
Yeah.
at the same
And
time,
did you tell
so
anyone?
no, that was the thing. I, at the same time, it's just really, of course, this is just blunt.
Yes.
I didn't not like it, so it was just hard to like
Mm-hmm.
tell
Mm-hmm.
someone because you felt bad about it, but then also you were kind of like intrigued by it. And I felt
Of
like if I
course.
told my
Yeah.
parents about it, I would get in trouble, and I didn't want that to happen, so I kept it for a long time, and it wasn't until
Yeah.
I was like, I think I was 20 when I realized what happened to me was not okay, and that was molestation.
Wow.
So.
It's so confusing when you're young. It is, and I know a lot of our listeners, and I know have very personal friends, close people to me that have walked through stuff like that. And it's so confusing when you're young because there is that mixture of pleasure and curiosity, but something's off, but
Mhm.
you don't know what, and you don't want to get in trouble, and you don't want to get anyone else in trouble. And so you just kind of live with
And
it for a
so, I
long
mean, and
time.
with that, I think the biggest thing as a child is that my parents never really had the sex talk with me. And because we lived in such a
Mm,
conservative place, like my parents were really high in the community. Um, it was just something that my parents avoided. My parents are a little bit older than the average parent. So my parents had me at like 38, and I actually have an older brother, but he's 14 years older than I am. So there was like, I was kind of like an only child, but I wasn't, but he was never around because he was like 18 when I was 4. Um, so I
mm,
didn't have like a lot of strong male figures in my life. My dad, he did amazing providing for us, and my parents are happily married. But he was just always at work, and so I was just always with my mom. And so I never really emotionally connected with my dad. I didn't really have my brother there because he was living his life and, doing his own thing.
mm-hmm.
And then with that sexual experience, and then just kind of like my feelings and where I was at, it just kind of like all began a seed, and it planted like this. It was the beginning
Mm-hmm.
of everything. So um, I think it's super important, for parents to have those sex talks, to have those hard conversations with your
Yeah.
children, um, and kind of like help that, because if you don't
Yeah.
have those conversations with your children, people in the world will. So.
Oh, and I know we say that all the time. Parents will ask us, my daughter's 12, 13. Do you think she's too young for me to talk about this certain aspect of sexuality? Or I'm
Hmm.
like, no, she's not. Like, she is actually probably too old. Like, you should have had this a couple years
Right.
ago because the world, especially today, is so blunt, so in your face with all aspects of sexuality, pushing a very clear agenda and worldview
A
on us
thousand
at
percent.
every turn that, parents, I'm like, if you're not ahead of the game, like ahead of the curve and teaching what is true, then your children don't even have that lens, that filter to go, when they're hearing stuff from the world or even their own desires, temptations to go, wait a minute, this doesn't align with what I know to be true, what I know to be God's design. So yes, I'm a huge proponent of that also. But let me ask you something. When you were, young, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, you're feeling these feelings of attraction toward men. The world back then was in a very different place than it is today.
Oh, yeah.
Today, you're openly affirmed. I mean, you're seeing it on Disney, Nickelodeon, all of these things pushing, all of these lifestyles that were very hush hush back then. So, was anyone talking about it in your world, or how are you processing that internally?
I think honestly, there wasn't a lot. There really wasn't a lot. Even in high school and middle school, like the kids that like we found out were gay, it was very like taboo.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I grew up in the Bible Belt. I grew up in like a very close-knit community. It's not a small town, but it's a suburb of Atlanta. And my parents are boomers, so they grew up very like Southern conservative, like we don't talk about this, we don't talk
Yeah.
about that. And I remember really the reason I kept it all in as a child was because I remember having a conversation. We were out to dinner, and this was back in the day when American Idol was like, you could go on and you had to like call in multiple times to vote for your person
Yes.
that you liked. And um, it was back when Adam Levine was on there, and he was like this kind of alternative. He was completely different than all of the other the people on American Idol,
Mm-hmm.
and he wore skinny jeans. And realistically, like looking back, I was like, man, he's really attractive and he's different and he sings really cool and I like his style. And I would just always talk about how much I liked him and I would vote for him all the time. And um, my mom had saw something on the news where they did an interview with him and he was like openly gay.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad immediately said, well, we don't talk about fags. And then like that whole conversation
Mm-hmm.
got shut down. And a lot of people like look at that, and I've had people come at me and being like, I can't believe your dad was like that, and they try to like create my dad as a monster. But the reality
Mm.
is he grew up in the deep South. He grew up with very conservative parents. His upbringing was traditional but not traditional, and the biggest thing about our family was that we were just taught not to talk about the bad things. So in this
Mm.
time frame with like having older parents, and then also it's not a thing that many people talked about, especially being in the South.
Yeah.
The only places that I would see it is like on MTV or different like television shows or stuff like that. Like those were the only
Mm.
places that I would like, oh, there's other people that like like this stuff. And I was scared to tell people at school. Like I never told my friends. Like it was very like I just completely kept it to myself and
Yeah.
bottled it up.
Yeah. And do you feel like at that time, what was your view of religion or Jesus or even your identity? Like, do you feel like you were trying to find your identity? What was going on?
I think that ultimately, like what's taught in the South, and it might be a little bit different now, but you just kind of get taught like to be a good old boy and you don't cuss, you
Mm.
don't drink, you don't smoke, and you get to
Just
heaven,
morally
and it's
upright, do the right thing, check the
you just be a
boxes.
moral, you're right.
Yeah.
And then exactly. And then as well as too, it's just like I went to church camp. I knew and I was around church because my brother and his wife, they actually went through like a ministry program. They were kind of like the people that I looked up to, and I wanted to be a pastor because of them.
Mm.
But the reality was, I didn't have a relationship with Jesus. I really didn't know what that took. And I just kind of looked
Mm.
at it as like, as long as I'm good, as long as I'm a good
Yeah.
boy and I go to church, then I can do that kind of thing. And so it was like, I really didn't have a relationship with the Lord. I kind of, as I grew up and into my teen years, I kind of was like, oh, like I'm okay with going to hell. Like I'm going to hell in a
Mm-hmm.
handbasket. Like I had that kind of like that idea because it really wasn't the the overall idea of going to hell and just religion in general was just kind of like very muted to me.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't clear on those kind of things because I never really dove in deeper than the surface level going to church on Sundays and
Yeah. And
Wednesdays.
that's really religion if it's just religion for religion's sake. There's no relationship, no personal
Hmm.
walk with Jesus, no understanding of him changing us, transforming us surrendering, and then finding freedom in that, then it's just a checklist. It's just pharisaical. It's all outward, no inward. And that's so empty. That doesn't lead us to any sort of
Right.
place of hope. So sounds like that's kind of where you were at. And at this time, as you're getting into your teen years, was there a point where you came out publicly and said, I'm gay, or did you kind of secretly kind of keep it inside?
I still kept it to myself. I did come out to my brother and my sister-in-law because we got into like a huge argument, and I told them that I was going to be a liberal Christian,
Mm,
and that I could do that. And that was kind of like the beginning of this idea in my head that I could be like gay and Christian. Um, so it was really just like this. It was the beginning of that like whole because I never came out to my parents. I was too afraid that honestly I would ruin their like identity in the community and the way
mm,
people looked at them. And again, my parents both were heavily involved in the community. Everybody, tons of people know them. And I didn't come out just for that. I didn't want to embarrass them or be like, the son that completely screwed up everything.
mm,
Um, and so the times that I was like with my boyfriend or like with the guys, I just kept it to a secret and I just kind of like made it very like low key and I didn't tell anybody. It took me a really long time to even tell one of my best friend. I finally ended up telling my best friend and I told her like she kind of just figured it out because me and my boyfriend were both friends with her and she just kind of
mm,
like put the two together. But um, I was honestly just too scared. I was too scared to tell people, and I was too scared to talk about it. And I think like when I tell that part of my testimony, a lot of people were like, "Oh, you were too scared and you didn't come out, so then you just went back into your closet, like
mm,
you didn't get real deliverance, or you're fake or whatever it is." But the reality is I was just too scared. I was too scared to like ruin my parents' reputation. But at
mm,
this point, like I'm like I don't have that on me anymore. Like, if I really wanted that lifestyle, I would go for it. But there's nothing in that lifestyle that has it. I don't have any, it doesn't have anything for me.
mm,
It's not going to give me anything.
mm-hmm.
So,
So when did drag enter the scene for you?
so, it was my high school time. And at this point, I had been with like a couple of guys, just kind of like, fooling around or whatever. And, um, I had gotten the lead role in the musical Hairspray as the mom, and it was the role that I wanted to finish my high school senior career in theater. As I was heavily involved with theater, and it was like I knew that that was my passion, that there was something there for me. Um, and so I landed that role, and after every show, the parents were just like, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea that was you. Like, I thought they hired like a middle-aged woman to play that role. Like,
Mm,
I thought that you were a real woman, or this was the best role I've ever seen you in, or you did an incredible job." Like, and it was just like all this
yeah.
praise. And from middle school into high school, I really never had a solid friend group. I had to force my friends, honestly. Like, it wasn't until like maybe my senior year that I had like two friends that I could actually consider my friends and I could hold
Mm,
close. But everyone else was really just kind of like I stuck myself there. I was trying to like be there in the right time, the right place. Um, and it was honestly sad and pathetic, but it was really just because like I never felt like I was enough. Like I never felt like,
mm,
and I just had to constantly perform to have friends. Um, and so I never like had a people group to be a part of. It was
yeah.
really just kind of like I kind of grew up alone and I had friends,
Mm,
but they weren't friends. Um, and so it was really just like this, it was just this like feeling of like, oh my gosh, people are accepting me and people love me as this. And it was like instant gratification,
yeah.
instant validation. And I was like, man, like this was amazing. And so I graduated high school. I'm still 18 years old, and I'm kind of like I started dating my ex-boyfriend, and I was like, okay, we're dating, and I'm keeping it low key, and then I was trying to figure out like I was like, what do I want to do? Like, I'm just kind of, I was kind of like at a crossroads, and I had a job, and I got myself an apartment and all this kind of stuff. And then I was like, one day I actually used to work at this like hookah lounge, and I was working at the lounge one day, and I was like, I would do karaoke there, and I would do tons of like different songs and stuff, and people were like, "Oh my gosh, I just love you," and I was like, man, like, what if I did drag again? Like, I was like, I've never
Mm,
been a drag queen, but like, what if I did that? Like, what does it even look like to be a drag queen? And so that night, like, I did tons of research. I started watching because I'd never watched it before, but I watched like RuPaul's Drag Race, and I watched like all
mm,
these interviews, all these like makeup tutorials, because I had gotten like an idea of how to do it because I've been in theater for
yeah.
10 years. So I was like, I basically know how to do makeup. And then once I watched those videos, like, I got really good, and I was like, okay. So then I was like, well, it's okay. Like, I'll put it in the back burner. So then I got a call from a former mom who was at the high school, and she was like, hey, we're doing this charity event, and they're gonna have like a drag competition, and every like company that's a part of this charity event has to like bring their own drag queen, and we don't have one. Like, would you consider doing it since you played that
Mm,
character in high school? And I was like, you know what? Yeah. And so it was like that day, that night, the night before this character was birthed,
mm,
this facade, and um, I went and bought this really like terrible wig, and I created this 1960s looking housewife character named Velma. And so I went and I performed a song from Hairspray that was like a very like sensual song, and I people were just like loving it. They loved it.
mm.
They thought I was great, and it was like the character Velma who sings it in Hairspray. I just kind of like took her name and kind of took her look, and she was just like this very chic, very like suave, blonde 1960s character, and I just a little bit like fell in love with her. So I just based my whole drag off of her, and
Mm.
so I did that song. Everybody loved it. I literally I raised the most money out of all the drag queens that day,
Wow.
and it was just like this like moment of like this is where I'm at. So then I started buying more wigs and more looks and more things. I started getting into it a lot more. With that came drug use, tons of
Mm.
alcohol, even not just smoking weed but going into cocaine. Like, it was like once I got into that one thing, everything came. So it was
Mm.
like really, I got this validation, and I found this facade, I found this character, and I put her on, and then I just got like instant
Yeah.
gratification, and people loved it. And I finally found a place where I was
Mm.
accepted. I finally found like these warm arms that were willing to come and hug me and say, like, you're enough and you're accepted.
Yeah. I have a question for you. I know a lot of our listeners are going to be wondering the same thing. For many of us, drag is a very like kind of an unknown. It's like we see it and we hear about it, but we don't really know like a lot of the behind the scenes. I mean, how like my questions for you are how does one get into it? Is it just like exactly what you described? You just decide, I want to become a drag queen, and then you create a character for yourself and you just start getting gigs at nightclubs. And I mean, how does it all work?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, that's very close. I mean, you just kind of like start. A lot of the stories I've heard is like you just play around as a young kid, and you just like start, getting a vibe for what you want, or like feeling
Mm.
out, and then you start playing around with it, and you start playing around with makeup and that kind of thing. And I had actually there was a guy at a sister high school that was a full-on drag queen, um, and he was
When you
our
say full on, sorry, really quick, when you say full on, what does that mean?
So
Full
he
on
was
drag
actually
queen.
already in the whole lifestyle. Like, he would go to
Okay.
football games as his drag persona. Like,
Okay.
he would go to theater events as his drag persona. Like, people knew him as his drag persona. And
Okay.
so it was like in the drag world, like, you have like drag moms and drag sisters and stuff like that. And if you want to call it that, like, he was basically like my drag mom. Like, there's someone that helps you
Mm.
get into the business, and
Okay, like a mentor kind of.
essentially, and he was
Okay.
basically already doing it. Like he was 18 too, and he was performing in clubs and stuff like that. And the biggest thing is like what people don't know is there are some 40-year-old drags, there's tons of them, but a lot of the fresh drag queens are not even like old enough to be in that club. But they show up
Like
in,
underage
yeah, I mean, they
boys.
show up in makeup, they show
Mm.
up in hair, they show up with their body on, and so the club
Mm-hmm.
owners don't question it. Like if you they don't ask, they're just like, oh, you want to be in a drag, cool. And I mean, I
Mm.
know that there's some that ask, but once you get your name around, they just want you for your name, they don't care. Like they know you've performed before and you've performed in other clubs, so you're just like, okay, cool. Like they just let you come in, and that's exactly what I would did. I showed up in hair and makeup and just put on the costume when I got there, and so they never questioned me. So
Mm.
like really, it's like there's tons of underage drags. There's tons of like I mean, a lot of clubs are 21 and up, and some of these kids are
Mm.
18, 19, 20 years old, and they're not even of age to be in the club yet, or
Wow.
drink alcohol. And older men will buy them
Right.
drinks. Like, I mean, people don't understand, but this is like another route um, of sex trafficking. Like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
older men will go into drag clubs and buy a guy a drink, and like then they forget what's happening, and then it's like
Yeah.
they find themselves in a completely different situation. So it's like
Yeah.
I was doing some pretty sketchy stuff as a 19-year-old, and I just kind of like he was like, hey, like I'm gonna try to get you a spot, and he got me a spot at a local club. It was kind of like a small, like little janky club, and I just did a performance, and it made me feel really good. Everybody loved me, and then um, after that, it was um, just gung ho from there. I would just like show up at random bars
Mm.
with my drag persona on. I did like a few performances here and there at different like bars and theaters and stuff, but that's really like the biggest way people get into it. They get really good at home, and then they just kind of like start
Mm.
showing up places, start trying to get connected with the drags. It's super easy to get into the community. So once you get in the community, you make friends, then um, gigs and stuff come your way pretty easily.
Yeah, it kind of sounds similar to like an artist, like a musician,
Yeah, I mean,
you know,
essentially,
starting small and like playing here and there, and you
mhm,
get connected, and then you get bigger gigs, and
yeah.
you build a name for yourself and a
Mhm.
following. So you mentioned there are sister drag queens, daughter drag queens, or mom drag queens. You mentioned, are there lots of types or?
So essentially, it's just like they create a family, and that's the biggest thing is like that's why a lot of people, the LGBTQ community is so accepting because it's
Mm,
a family oriented thing. You know, like I had a drag mom,
mm,
and that's another thing. Like if your drag mom was like a very popular drag queen, what you did was you inherited her last name. So, um, like
okay.
essentially, like my character's name was Velma, and I inherited like the rest of my name came from my drag mom. And so you have this like long list of drag queens that pass down the name throughout the entire like.
Okay. Wow, that's so interesting. Like this family
So then
dynamic.
like
Yeah.
your sisters are like the other girls or the other drag queens that are like under that particular woman, or the under that particular guy that's a
Mm,
drag queen. Like so then you have like, oh, you have your aunts and you have all that kind of stuff. It's just like this whole like it's a whole thing, but
wow.
they created like a family dynamic, and I mean it's super popular.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's kind of like how you really get into it.
Wow. So you're taking on the first name of your drag mom, or is there a last name?
No, the last name, yeah. So like there like there's a popular drag queen. I can't, I've been out of
Right.
the community for a very long time, but her name is like Trixie
Mm-hmm.
Mattel. She's super popular. He's on Nickelodeon. He was on Blue's Clues, I believe, like all kinds of stuff. Um, and then anyone that he takes on under him takes on that Mattel, like the
Mm.
last name essentially. Some people just kind of create their own drag name and they choose not to do that, but a lot of people in the community that I was part of would just be like, it would be you would take on Like my name was Velma, and then the middle name was Vaughn because that was like the drag my drag mom's middle name, and then I just kind of created my own last name. So I
Mm.
just picked up that middle name as their cousin.
Wow,
So
interesting. So there is this entire sense, like you said, this sense of community, of family, of
mhm.
belonging. So for someone who is searching, trying to find that place of acceptance, that place of belonging, it sounds very appealing.
Yeah, I mean it's like an open community. People
Mm-hmm.
are like, "Hey, come be a part of this." You know, like
Yeah.
it's actually something that people feel comfortable with. They feel like they can be a part of, and it gives people that sense of belonging.
Mm-hmm.
It that's why the biggest thing is I feel like that's where the church goes wrong is they get so caught up in the sin and they're like, oh, I don't want to touch you, you're tainted or that kind of
Mm.
thing. They get uncomfortable, but I'm like the LGBTQ community is like, hey, we're here, we accept you,
Right.
come on in.
Right. So there's that aspect of appeal. What else is appealing
Mhm.
from your perspective and having lived in that world for grown men to dress as very sexualized grown women and the appeal to
Yeah.
dress like that and then the appeal for people to watch it for entertainment?
Well, and here's the thing that I think is like it's it's kind of comical to me, but I'm also just kind of like what I actually saw another drag queen do an interview on this. Um, Drag queens in general are basically like strippers. I mean, like drag queens would perform in adult clubs, adult bars,
Mhm.
21 and up, like, and we have all of these people wanting them to, all these drag queens all of a sudden to be a part of their community and being a part of like their like kids' lives and their television and all this kind of
Mhm.
stuff. And I think the other appealing part of it is like, of course, the instant gratification, the acceptance and stuff, but it's also like a moment to take like off your hat, and I'm no longer having to be this person, and I get to be this completely different person
Mm.
that doesn't have any issues, and I don't have to worry about all my problems. I don't have to worry about this, that, and the other. Um, and so that gives it a little bit more of like it's a facade. It's this like it's a fake identity that you get to take on for an hour or two that you get to just take a step back and be this person. And it's kind of
Mm.
like the same appeal as theater is, but it's at the same time, it's like so many people get caught in the facade that it just becomes them. Their voice begins to
Mm.
change. The way they walk, the way they act begins to mold into this other person. And they're no longer this person that they were created to be. They're now this new facade. And
Mhm. Mhm.
that's the biggest warnings I tell to parents and family members and people that want to minister to the LGBTQ community is I tell them be very wary about using pronouns, using their names that they want, you know, using these false identities because what you're doing is you're partnering with this demonic identity that has been created and now you're enforcing it. And a lot of people come at
Mm.
me like, oh, well, that's super disrespectful that you wouldn't use you're never going to reach them that way. You're never going to minister to them that way. But I'm like, it's going to just get harder for you and for them if you continue to like validate this demonic false identity that they created for themselves. Um,
Mm.
and I mean, it's like appealing, but it's also very like, it's very, very, very false. It's just like it's this like
Yeah.
idea of like something so beautiful. It's kind of like the prodigal son. He had this idea of what his life was going to be like without his father, and when he actually got there and like lived the life,
Mm.
it was like it wasn't everything it was cracked up to be.
Yeah.
But they continuously stay in that drag persona, so they don't have to worry about all their other issues.
Mm, like as an escape almost. Like I'm
Yeah,
escaping
essentially.
into this to be this other person and as long as I'm in that character, life feels good.
Mhm.
But then
A
reality
thousand
hits is
percent.
what you're saying. Like we all have to
And
face
I mean,
reality.
that's sin in general. Sin is sin. I mean, and that's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
all
Forget yeah,
sin. All sin is an escape. All sin is, but it's just
right.
like when you add that persona part, you add that portion where it's like I don't have to be this person anymore. It's like it's a lot
Mhm.
more enticing.
Yeah. So for you, at what points you felt that high when you were dressing in drag and you were receiving affirmation, acceptance, but then you were still Blake? I
Yeah.
mean, you still had your life as a guy, right? And how did you feel when you were just Blake?
I actually, I mean, I just kind of like lived life. I was just kind of like, I didn't like me. I was very
Mm,
insecure about myself and that kind of thing. And honestly, that's really where the only reason I stopped drag, I wasn't even saved. It was just like I stopped drag because I got tired of people accepting her and not me. Like I was like, why
mm,
do I have to be this whole other person for people to love me and accept
mm,
me? Like why do I have to like put on this whole circus for you to accept me? Like I feel like I'm not a terrible person. I'm not a hard person to like, and I don't understand why I've never really had friends. I don't understand why I can't just like
mm.
really find people that like accept me for who I am. Like it's just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Like I was like I felt so alone. And so it was like the realities hit me when I was Blake because it was just like I enjoyed it, but then I started getting tired of it because I was like, no, like I hate that. I hate having to be somebody else. Like
Mm,
that's so dumb. Like it was fun every once in a while, but to do it all the time and to only get affirmation when I was Blake was just exhausting, or when I was
mm.
Velma was exhausting. And so it was just
Yeah.
like I was ready to like give it up, and I was searching for something else, and that's really like the why the whole transition happened was because I was like, what is going on with my life? Like I just kind of like hit a breaking point and I got tired of having to put on heels, having to put
Mm,
on makeup, having to put on a bodysuit, having to put on all these wigs and create a whole nother persona just to um,
mm.
be liked.
Wow. Yeah, it was empty. I mean,
Mm,
at the end of it, it sounds like you weren't, the satisfaction wasn't lasting. It wasn't carrying over truly into every part of your life.
yeah.
So it's at this point in time, things are starting to change. How old are you at this point?
At this point, it was the at the end, I was probably in the full drag community, I guess, really about 6 to 8 months. Um, and which doesn't sound like a long time. Like I know tons of drag queens that have been doing it for 20 years, like, um,
Mm,
and it was a really, like, I was basically at a place where like my career it was really about to start taking off because people were starting to hear
mm,
my name around the Atlanta community and that kind of thing. And I try not to like I will say Velma all day long because that's a very common name within the drag community, but I try not to say my last name because I don't really want to like I don't want people to come find me. But um,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I I just I was kind of like it it was just like I was in a crossroads. Like I was just kind of like, where am I at? What am I doing? Um, and I was kind of like wanting to get out of that, but at the same time, like I was just kind of like, what else is there out there for me? Like I had a lot of
Yeah.
questions.
So what happened next? I mean, you have a lot of questions, you're struggling. Are you thinking
Um,
about God at this point? Are you like, no, I don't want anything to do with him?
so I really was just kind of like, I knew God was in the background the whole time, and I was like, okay, maybe I need to go to a Christian college, and I can like what I was
Mm,
really looking for out of God, because I had this like idea of what I wanted from God,
mm.
instead of what God wanted from me.
So you actually wanted something from
And
him though. You wanted God. It was just God on your own terms at this point.
yeah, so it was just like I wanted stability, and I
Mm,
wanted because like my drug use was out of hand. I even got to a point where I almost overdosed on cocaine, and I got super scared. I watched one of my friends almost overdose, and I was like, okay, we need to like figure out plan B. What is plan B, Lord? Like, I was like, okay, because I got to a point where when I remember that night, like when I was watching my friend almost overdose, I told the Lord, I was like, okay, like if you get me out of this, like I'll stop doing drugs. That was my
mm,
agreement. And so I was trying to figure out a place where I could go to help me, like, just kind of like get my mind off drug issues and drinking all the time and get rid of the drag persona. I didn't want people to know me as that drag persona, but I still wanted to keep my homosexuality. I wanted to still date guys and all that kind of stuff.
Mm.
And so I had actually auditioned and gotten a job at a theme park in Orlando, and it was my dream job, and I was super excited about it. I was like, I grew up on these movies and this company and that kind of
Mm.
thing, and so I was like, I am ready. And I had been casted as a character from one of my favorite movies from this company, so I was like, okay, I'm done. Like, I'm ready. Like, let's go do this. This is my way out. I can go and get into college in Central Florida and like just kind of like be a Christian, but also like have my gay life,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't have to worry about the drug thing anymore. I don't have to worry about drugs or alcohol. Like, I can just like start over. And I was getting ready to move to Orlando, and I was in about to like I was looking at apartments, I was looking at different things, and they were supposed to be sending my training packets and all that kind of stuff to get me started. And my mom was like, "Well, what if you go to the Ramp, this ministry school in Hamilton, Alabama?" And I was like, "Okay, first of all, that's not in Orlando." I was like, "That's in Bumfreak, America." I was like, "We're not doing
Yeah.
that." I was like, I'm not going there. Like, that's not in Orlando. It's not part of the plan." And I had a cousin that was going to the ministry school at the time, and so I was like, my mom was like, "Well, just go. You start in August, go until November. If you hate it, then I'll help you move to Orlando and we'll get everything." And I was like, I don't know, like I landed this job, like I want to move to Orlando, and
Mm.
she was like, "Just go." And I was like, "Okay." So
Question.
like
Did your
I
mom at this point have any idea of your
no,
homosexual lifestyle, being a drag queen? Did she have any idea? She's like saying, go to ministry school. Like,
no,
did she?
yeah.
Okay, she had no
She had
clue.
no idea.
Okay.
So my family knew that like some things were off about me because I was like my drug use came to
Mm.
light with my brother and sister-in-law, and they kind of like saw like different pieces of it, and so they confronted me about it. And I don't think they told my parents about it, but they knew that it was super unhealthy and inconsistent, and I was like staying up all night long and then sleeping all day long, and like coming home high or coming home with
Mm.
red eyes, or like, and it was just like I was out of it all the time, and so they knew something was
Yeah.
up.
And maybe that's why they were
um
like, go to ministry school, like, get your life
yeah,
together.
so I mean, my mom was kind of like, I don't know what's going on with Blake, but he needs to do
Mm-hmm.
something.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody was really excited for me to move to Orlando. But then when I started talking about possibly going to a Christian school, then my mom was like, "We'll go to the Ramp," and I was like, "No." So I ended up applying anyway. I applied, and then I came to this part of the application where it told me to tell my testimony, and I was like, I'm not
Mm.
about to tell all these people in Alabama that I struggle with homosexuality,
Yeah.
or I at the time, like, I'm not about to tell them all that I'm gay. Um, and so I just told them, like, I used to do drugs and I was a bad kid. Now I'm not, and I love Jesus. And I just kind of like BS the whole application.
Mm.
And somehow I got accepted. And so the lady, it was literally 2 weeks before school started,
Wow.
and the lady who was in charge of admissions like called me and was like, "Okay, we got to get all this stuff in and immediately, and like all this kind of stuff." And I was like, "Okay." And I was just kind of like blown away. Like, I was like, "How did I even get accepted?" But I was kind
Mm.
of, as the time started coming, like I kind of started getting excited because I was like, "Well, maybe this is a new start. Maybe this is a fresh start." And then, then I can, get my crap together, and then, I'll find a guy and we can get married and we can be
Mm.
Christians and stuff like that. So I was just kind of like, I started becoming hopeful for like getting a stable life. Um, and so then we go to Hamilton, Alabama for orientation. I had actually already committed to one last drag show for a local theater. And so I had that right after my orientation.
Oh,
So I
wow.
went to orientation, and I was like, the day before orientation, we showed up a day early. We went to their just like normal Wednesday night service. And we went early so we could see my cousin and kind of like catch up with her and that kind of thing. And we went to Wednesday night service, and it was just like a regular service. It wasn't anything special. It wasn't conference. It wasn't anything crazy. And I remember the worship leaders, she was just going off, and everybody was in the altar, which was very confusing to me because at the mega church I went to, everybody stayed in their seats. And I was just kind of like, why is everybody? And my cousin was like, hurry, we got to get to the altar. Like all the places are going to be taken. And I was just like,
Mm.
why are we going up there? Like, that's weird.
Yeah, like, okay.
And so we get up to the altar, worship starts, and everybody's just like jumping, flinging their arms everywhere, like worshiping Jesus just completely freely. And I was like, I don't know what to do but clap. I was just kind of like really confused. And so I was like, okay, like, so I just started doing what everybody else was doing. I was just worshiping and I was dancing and I was jumping and I started like feeling, I felt joy. I felt happiness. I started feeling good, and I was like, "This is crazy. Like, what is this?" And the worship leader in the middle of this really hype song, she right before she went into the bridge, she was like, I feel like this so strongly from the Lord that there are people in this room that are coming to the school, and your yes to God has literally set you up for a destiny that you had no idea was coming. Like, literally, your yes, if you could just like pull back the curtain and take a peek of what God had for you, you would be in awe with what your yes means today. And so she's like, when I go into this bridge, when you move your body, when you move your feet, when you open your mouth, the darkness has to flee. I want you to sing that with everything you have, dance that with everything you have, and just like release that. I just let it go. I went full in. I went full in for the Lord. And then we hit a slow song, and it was just like everything slowed down. It was like I almost felt like I was in this
Mm.
slow motion love story movie. Like that moment where like everything slows down and like the two characters just meet and fall in love. Like that's how I felt. Like
Mm.
I had experienced this tangible presence of Jesus that I had never experienced before. Like
Mm.
it literally felt like Jesus walked into the room and was just there. Like I could, it's like when you're in a room by yourself and then you feel someone watching you or something, it's kind of like that feeling. Like it's the same thing, but it was just like I just felt like there was another person in the room that was like there for me, and it was just this like overwhelming feeling. I was just like I just like completely broke. And I was like, okay,
Mm.
Lord, like I'm gonna give you everything. And I laid down the drugs, I laid down the alcohol and all that stuff.
So
And I
really a
had this
moment of
amazing
surrender.
encounter, a thousand
Like a
percent.
huge moment
But
of surrender and repentance, it sounds like.
yeah. But the one thing that I took away from that altar was I was still holding on to my sexual orientation with
Okay.
guys. Like it was not one altar
Mm.
moment.
It was
And
God, I want
so
you and I want to surrender, but not everything.
I was there in Alabama trying to prove all these rant
Mm.
people, all these mystery people that you could be gay and Christian.
Okay.
And I finally was like, oh, I've got a hold of God, and I feel him. Um,
Mm.
and so then, like, over the course of this year, I was in ministry school. I had some really tough meetings. I had really tough moments with the Lord where I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I'll be honest, like, I would get on my hookup apps and I would hook up with guys every once in a while when I felt like I just didn't have it or I wasn't being accepted or whatever it was,
Mm.
or I
Just kind
felt
of looking for
lonely.
some, like, okay, I need some affirmation.
Yeah,
I need
I
some
just need some
acceptance.
I need exactly. And
Mm-hmm.
honestly, it wasn't even just like a whole sexual thing. It was just like the idea of being held by a guy and just being with him. Like, I mean, of course,
Mm.
it's just like the idea of being with your husband. Like, you want to be next to him sometimes and just like lay on him and like feel him. So it's the same thing. Like,
Mm.
I just wanted like that affirmation, that physical affirmation, not necessarily in a sexual way, but just in like, let's hang out and sit on a couch together. Um, and so I was hooking up with guys and doing stuff like that. But throughout that entire year, like the Lord kept encountering me in different ways. And I remember I started getting my prayer life together, and I started like trying to like pray and read the word every day. And I wasn't too successful, but when I did it, like it really did something for me. And I was reading one day, and I came across this scripture in Matthew, and it says, there will be a day where men will come to me and say, Lord, Lord, we prophesied in your name. We cast out demons in your name. We did everything for you. And he's going to say, get away from me, you workers of iniquity. I never knew you. You
Mm.
never knew my name. And it was like this, like, moment with the Lord that I was like, maybe I've been doing this whole thing, this whole Christian thing without knowing the Lord. Like, I've been
Mm.
playing the part, I've been doing all this stuff, but I haven't been doing it with God. I haven't been doing it with Jesus. And it was like this fear of the Lord moment where I was like, I didn't, it was like I got scared, but I was like, it was a whole thing. Like, I was like, I've been doing this all wrong. And it was like this moment where I was like, okay, Lord, like, I'm going to give up everything. I'm going to give up everything. I'm going to give up the guys. I'm going to give up absolutely everything. And if I hate it, I'm going to go back.
Mm.
And it was this trying season. Like, when I gave up, like, I was just like, it was like constantly remembering to renew your mind every day, like pick up your cross every day. I hear people all the time say, like, I was born this way, and I'm like, well, guess what, friend? Jesus says you have to be born again. Like people, I've been there. And it wasn't ever like this moment of like where pastors got in a room and they brainwashed me. It wasn't anybody else's
Mm-hmm.
decision. Like, it was literally me. There was no like conversion therapy. Like, I
Yeah.
decided to try this out, and I just found that there was so much more gratification in the kingdom of God than the homosexual
Mm.
community could ever bring me. And it was like, I, people try to argue with me all the time, and I hate getting in arguments because for me, it's not worth it. But it's like, the reality is like, Jesus is so much better. I don't have anxiety. I don't have depression. I don't have suicide. I don't have to rely on drugs to make me feel any type of a way, whether they're prescribed or street drugs. Like, I just literally have to go to Jesus, this one place, this one thing, and I get everything I
Mm.
need. And it's not like this religious mumbo jumbo. Like, it's like
Yeah.
a genuine, like, tangible feeling that you can have a peace. And I mean, there was a time, like I talk about in my book, like, it wasn't an easy process, and it's
Right.
not the biggest thing to tell people. I wrote it in my book. It's this moment that I have with the Lord, and it was like in prayer, and because I was like, Lord, like, why? I don't want this life anymore. Like, I've already told you, I decided I don't want to be
Mm.
gay. So why do I still have these, like, feelings? Like, why does my mind
Yeah.
still
These
go there? Like, I don't
desires. Mm-hmm.
understand. Like, I've been every all, I've done everything. I pray all the time. I read my Bible, and the Lord said, it's not a gay to straight transition. It's a from broken to whole transition. And
Mm.
that like wrecked me, because it was like, the Lord's not going to take like my lust for a man and take it away and give me lust for a woman. Like,
Mm-hmm.
he's not going to
Mm-hmm.
take one sin pattern away to give you a new one. Like, if that's what you're waiting on, it's not going to happen, bro. Like, it's not. It's
Yeah.
like, I remember the reason me and my wife even started dating was because we were in Alabama. There's not much to do. Like, we could go to Walmart or Taco Bell. Like, that was it. So it was like, we were on our way home from work, because we worked in Mississippi, even though we lived in Alabama. And we were on our way home from work. We had about a 45-minute drive, and I was like, let's just pray. And so we turned on worship music, we started praying. And as I was like praying, I just like looked over at her, and I was like, dude, I could do this with her forever. And then immediately I was
Mm.
like, do I like a girl right now? Like,
Mm.
I was like, do I like a girl? Like, is this for real? and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I was just kind of like, it was like the Lord, it was like he gave me this desire for Anissa, not just sexually, but I
Mm.
fell in love with her, and I fell in love with who she is in the Lord and what God has on her life. I fell in love. We were literally, I tell teenagers all the time, because I used to be a youth pastor, I would tell them, like, find someone that is running as just as fast as you are towards God. And when you
Mm.
realize that it just makes sense to run together, because you're going the same
Mm-hmm.
direction, you're running at the same speed. And when I looked beside me, I saw Anissa. And so it was just like, when we got together, like, it was like a moment. Like, And I was honestly nervous. Like I was nervous. I had all of these like preconceived ideas of what marriage was going to be like, all this kind of stuff. Even before me and just when me and Anissa were friends, like I would tell her, like I was like, I don't know, like how I can ever tell a girl like I've slept with another dude. Like how can a woman
Mm,
be okay with her husband have slept with another guy? Like that's not like manly. That's not cool. Like I had all
mm,
of this like just this weightiness on me because I was like, my
yeah.
wife's never going to be able to look at me like a man, you know, like, and my wife and I, we had talked about everything when we were friends. We had literally like shared it all. There was no secrets. There was nothing that we hadn't told each other. And so it was like when she was like, I like you and I want to date you, I was just kind of like, she knows everything about me and she like wants
Mm,
this. And immediately like it was like over the course of our marriage, like the Lord really showed me like that's how his love is for me. Like he
yeah.
looked at me, he saw everything
Yes.
I'd done, he saw everything, every time I messed up, every time I went back on my word with the Lord, every time I made I you know I cursed the Lord, like every time I did
Mm,
that, and he was like, I know all of that, but I love you. And it just like it broke me because it's a different type of love.
mm,
It's not based on
yes.
sexual anything sexual. It's not based on just like, oh, she has a nice personality, da, 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 like, and we click
Mm-hmm,
together, we vibe
mm-hmm.
together. It's like it's a love that was formed and bonded that
Yeah.
is like no other. And honestly, like I wouldn't be where I'm at today without my wife because we are each other's like rocks and we have a
Mm.
beautiful 1 year old about to be 2 year old daughter. We actually
Aw.
just found out that we're pregnant, so we're expecting another one.
Oh, wow.
And thank
Congratulations.
you. And it's just honestly like, the Lord has just blown me away. Like going
Yeah.
on this journey, when you say yes, like there is so much for that God can do
Mm-hmm.
with a yes. Like
Yeah.
I, it's just like just say yes. And the journey,
Mm.
my journey was not hard, was not easy. It took me a lot of finding the different components and even some of the stuff I talked about today. Like
Mm.
I didn't even go into great detail of other things that I had to do to really like push myself out. But
Yeah.
the biggest thing too is just connecting with other Christians. Like if you're a guy struggling with homosexuality, I had to connect with a pastor, connect with other dudes that were like, I'm willing to like bond with you and get through
Yeah.
this. Like, because that's another thing is like I was so focused on being a drag queen, like everything I did was female. Like I walked like a girl, I worshiped like a girl. I my
Mm.
honestly in the last like 5 years, my voice has dropped like 2 octaves. Like I never took like any kind of like hormones or anything like that, but like I just kind of like when you spiritually get involved with something, it affects the physical. And so
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
my voice used to be higher and I literally the way I dressed was super feminine, like everything the way I walked was super feminine. And the Lord began to change those things in me and then begin to change my desires for clothes, begin to change my desires for the way I look at
Mm.
things. And it's like the Lord takes care of everything. You just have to say yes.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's I like bonding with like my my friends that are guys and then even like a couple of pastors that were in the ministry at the time that were willing to be like, I don't care what you're struggling with or what you're going through. Like I want to lock arms and arm with you and let's get through this. Let's get through the mud. Let's really
Mm.
like do this. And that's why I named my book From Mascara to Manhood because it's not like being gay makes you less of a man. It's like I was so caught up in the mascara that I when I transitioned I learned what it means to be a man of God and
Mm.
transitioning into my manhood as God has called me to be. And so, I mean,
Wow.
it's been a hard process. I'm not gonna. It's
Yeah.
it's honestly been worth it. The things that the Lord is taking me through, it's been
Yes.
rough, but it's also molded me
Mm-hmm.
and shaped me into the person that I am now.
Mm. Blake, we are almost out of time here. I feel like I could talk to you for another hour, but for the sake of your schedule, I will let you go soon. But I have a few more
That's fine.
questions. Something interesting I want to circle back on in your story when you were talking about coming to that point of realizing you couldn't fully surrender and walk a repentant life before the Lord and have Jesus 100% and hold on to your homosexuality at the same time. And something that is very common, you see it, I see it, I get emails from women who are saying, God, I'm a woman, I'm attracted to women. God made me this way. If he's a loving God, he wouldn't try to change me. And then there are churches and religious movements affirming this kind of thinking that is very unbiblical. But what would you say to that person who's like, but is Jesus better? Or why can't I have my homosexual life and Jesus at the same time? Like, what's the
Well, the
problem?
biggest thing with that, and I'll give you like the quick and easy answer, but
Yeah.
the Bible is very clear about that. There are literally 6 scriptures that talk about homosexuality in the Bible. Um, and a lot of people don't know this, but there's like not once in the Bible does it say, yes, go do it. But if you read the Satanic Bible, there's literally like tons of scriptures about, yes, homosexuality. Yes. Like, and my thing is like, why would something that opposes God, like, be okay with God? And I think the thing is like, God calls us to deny ourselves. Um, our self is what our self desires, what we want, what we feel like we deserve. And that's why I really got to a place where I was like, okay, God, I'm going to give everything up and then see where we're at. Like, I'm going to give everything up and then give you a try. And I began to grow faster. I began to like experience God in completely new ways. And honestly, I think people have that mentality and that thought process and that idea because the church has done a terrible job. There's tons of ministers, like I said earlier, like people are scared to talk about the subject, and then if they're not, then they're like, it's okay. Like, they just kind of brush over it, but then like they welcome all these people, and then they kind of validate them. We have a church here in San Antonio that literally on Saturdays turned their altar into a drag show. And so we have churches validating them. We have churches in gay pride parades. We have churches like literally preaching yes homosexuality. So there's a lot of confusion in this subject, but the Bible is very clear about it, and you cannot tell me that it's been lost in translation. It's because another person did this and that and the other. Because if you go back to like the Bible written in Hebrew, I'm not even going to try to say the word, but the word that was translated from homosexuality to homosexuality is a Hebrew word that literally means in Hebrew for a man to penetrate another man. And so, like, even if you're going to break down the Hebrew, like, let's go all the way back, it's still like homosexuality. Like, we translated it for homosexuality because that's the more like current term. It was added to the Bible in like 50s or 60s, I believe, or maybe the 40s. Because that was more of what the term was now being used for. So it's like, you can't tell me that it's been lost in translation or da 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 da. Like, I bought, like, I saw a TikTok where this girl bought a Bible from like the early 40s, and she was like, see, like, homosexuality is not even in this book, but the Hebrew words are that actually mean for a man to penetrate another man. So it's the same thing. And so honestly, like, I would encourage people, like, really dive into the Bible, dive into God's word, because the reality is what you're going to find is that it's not like the Bible is very clear about homosexuality and what God says about it. And in Romans, my favorite scriptures about homosexuality is in Romans 1. I think it's verse 27, 28, somewhere around there. And it literally it's like, when I read it, I'm like, bro, this is gay pride. Like, this is a whole gay pride, because it's like, it talks about homosexuality, like, literally, like, God lifts his hand off of people and gives them over to a carnal, evil mindset. And so then they start spreading rumors about each other. Men trade normal sexual, like, identities for like abnormal sexualities, homosexuality,
Mm-hmm.
and women trade their sexual things for sex with women. And it's also, even too, in the Old Testament, it was a part of Baal worship. People would literally, like, you would have sex with the same gender to worship the god Baal, along with um, baby sacrifices and all kinds of those crazy things. Like, literally, people would go into
Mm-hmm.
arenas and watch people have sex, and which is modern day porn.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's
Yeah.
literally a part of worshiping a separate God. So why would it be okay with our God? Why would it be okay? Because
Yeah.
in Zephaniah it says that God will destroy all. He is a jealous God, and He will destroy all of their idols.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found is people that have that mindset have created themselves as an idol, and they have this mindset is that
Mm.
I want what I want, and God wants what I want for me, and it's
Right.
not true.
Right. So, Blake, in closing, and that was all so good. Thank you, by the way, for being so bold and transparent and unafraid. You know, when we are walking in truth and when we are fully surrendered and we're living for the glory of God and we're living to build His kingdom and not our own, and we've traded our fleshly desires for His desires, you know, setting our minds and hearts on things that are above, there's no fear and shame in that forgiveness, in that redemption, and there's a boldness that comes with it. And we see that in the lives of so many believers throughout Scripture, and I see that in you. And I'm so encouraged that you are unafraid, you're unashamed of the gospel, you're unashamed of the truth, and you are clearly wanting to shout it from the mountaintops the transforming work of Christ and what it is to be redeemed, to become a child of God, and how that is where true satisfaction is found, not in what our flesh desires, not in what we long for, not in what the world has to offer or tells us is where we're going to find our identity, but in Christ. And it's worth giving up everything else for Him, because that's where life is. And so I'm so grateful for you and for your bold testimony. I know everyone listening is probably feeling the same. But for the woman right now, just in closing, I would love for you to offer a word of encouragement for her specifically. And I want to, before I read, you know, the question, I want to just say that oftentimes as believers, and especially believers who grew up in church, you know, that was me, very, you know, in a Christian family, never really struggled with super huge, you know, quote unquote, sexual sins, but definitely in my heart, lust, you know, struggle with masturbation for a while, just, you know, it's sin. It's sin in, you know, in the same way. But I think there can be this tendency in the church to have this mindset of, oh, there are those sexually broken people, you know, out there that we need to love and minister to. And then there's, you know, us in the church. We're sexually, you know, whole people. But when we look in Scripture, we see that we're all broken. We're all sinners. At the foot of the cross, we all need Christ the same. We're all sexually broken, in need of restoration. And so that's huge for us to recognize, that there aren't pure and impure people, but all of us seeking and pursuing the holiness and righteousness of Christ. And only through Him can we even be clothed in any sort of righteousness or wholeness. And so that's where we all are. We all need Christ. But for the woman right now who's specifically struggling with same-sex attraction, with her gender identity, with questioning God's design for her biblically, hearing these messages from culture and from different churches saying it's okay, we affirm who you are, who you feel you are. For that woman right now, what word of encouragement could you leave her with as she's wrestling, but maybe wanting to fight this fight and follow the Lord?
I definitely think the biggest thing for that woman right now is, again, like, the change is not going to happen overnight, but at the same time, like, it's going to take you having a daily encounter with the Lord, you know, constantly, not just like systematically, or, you know, making it a part of your daily thing where you just read the word and listen to worship music and kind of make it mechanical, but really like having a relationship with the Father. Get into your word, worship, do whatever it takes to really like feel the presence of the Lord. And then, as well as, find some women of God that aren't afraid to like link arms with you, just like I did with like those men of God that had never struggled with homosexuality ever, and they were, you know, like it was a completely different.
Yeah.
They were able to just kind of like teach me how to be a guy and how to like, do those things. And the same thing is just like surround yourself with bold women that are not going to be afraid to call you out and like, like check you, but at the same time, like love you through your crap and love you through your mess. It's important. Um, and second, I mean, I guess like lastly, like just remember that again, it's a from broken to whole transition, not gay to straight. If you're waiting on him to
Mm-hmm.
make you all of a sudden attracted to guys, like it's not going to happen. Like the Lord, it, it does happen over time, and I love my wife and I'm obsessed with her, but um, the biggest thing is if you're waiting on him to make you straight, then it's not going to be a part of the process. Like you have to really just deny yourself and run after wholeness and run after him, and everything else follows along. So many times, like people are waiting on the physical to happen, but the reality is you have to
Yeah.
focus on the spiritual before it happens in the physical realm. And so I think
Mm-hmm.
those are some important things to remember.
Blake, thank you so much again for sharing your testimony, for coming on, for just in your testimony providing so much hope. I think for women who are listening, who have a friend, who have a sister, who know someone going, can God really change our hearts? Is there hope? There is, and there is power in the gospel, and we see it in your life, and we see it in all of our hearts. We are all lost and broken without him, but with him there is light, there is truth, there is freedom, there is relationship, that sense of belonging that you described earlier. That's found in Christ. And then he's given us a family, the family of God, to walk that out with. So I love your encouragement for women to find a mentor. Essentially, we're huge on that here at Girl Defined. We're always telling women, get a mentor, get a godly mentor, find a woman who can walk with you. Galatians 6 tells us, bear one another's burdens. We're not meant to live this life in isolation on an island, but within community, sharpening one another, encouraging one another, really living out the one another's that we see in scripture. So thank you so much, guys. You can find his book From Mascara to Manhood. Grab a copy to read his full story. And then again, Sex, Purity, and the Longings of a Girl's Heart. Our book from here at Girl Defined takes a deep dive into all things sexuality, God's design for gender, struggling, secret struggles, things we never told anyone. How do we find freedom? You guys know we take a deep dive, so be sure to grab a copy at Girl Defined. And Blake, thank you so much again.
Yes, thank you. It was an honor and a privilege.